take a second to tell you about Nancy Maslin. She suffered a series of strokes the last little bit. She's been in the hospital, been out in care center, but she's going home tomorrow. So that's a really good thing. We're excited about that. Yeah, it's all right to clap for that. That's good. The challenge, though, is we don't know what's next for her and all the things, and she's in charge of a program that's really a good program here called Sunday Night at the Movies. So she may take that back on because knowing Nancy, who knows what she'll do. But it might be really good if someone else helps her out with that. So if you think you might want to be part of that, let me know and we'll hook you right into that and get you to connect. So, all right? Speaking of movies, today starts our summer of movies. I got 3 movies that I want to show you pieces of today. They're all those movies from about 100 years ago, when movies were just starting out and the whole world was black and white and silent, which is good for a noisy world sometimes, isn't it? And our first movie is about Willie. It's called Steamboat Bill Jr. and it stars Buster Keaton. And Willie is in a space where he's been hurt. He's in the hospital. And he thinks that he's getting care now, but his day has just begun. Okay, so has mine. Anyway, so there he is in his hospital bed, and a big wind begins to blow, throwing things all over the place, tearing down buildings, and in fact, everyone runs out of the hospital because the hospital gets carried away. And there he is, laying in his bed, oblivious too. Close.
It's not letting me fast forward.
You guys find the next one. I'll finish telling about this one. So there he is laying in his bed, and the wind just blows his bed along through town, through the middle of the stables, until he ends up in front of this church, and he gets out of bed and hides underneath it. And the pastor appears in the window above him, and he goes, I gotta get up here. There's a bed I can jump on. And jumps 2 stories down, lands on the bed, hitting Buster in the head on the way, and causing the bed to flip over and fly away, and there's Buster out in the elements again. He stands up kind of dazed, and the whole front of the church falls. Him going right through the window the pastor just jumped out of. And he walks across the rubble, going, oh my gosh, what's coming next? Anybody else have a day like that sometimes in your life? Where everything seems to be out of your control. Where life seems to be wreckage and wind. And I don't know what to do with it all. Life happens that way, doesn't it? Life causes us to not know what to do because the world around us is noisy in a lot of different ways. And I don't just mean mouth noisy, but just emotion noisy, experience noisy. Sometimes we like that. How many like it when wonderful music plays and carries you forward into something exciting? But how many have noise that sometimes carry you into not quite exciting, not quite easy? Places where it seems like our life is being torn apart and carried away by the wind of life. I want to tell you 2 stories from South Texas where I went to high school. Go Trojans. One comes from a little town about 60 miles up the road from me named Cuero. And in Cuero there was a Southern Baptist minister, as there are in all towns in South Texas. And he is making a proposition to the Southern Baptist Convention. His name is Pastor Arnold. He wants them to take an official position that says that preaching social justice is evil. That's noisy in my ears. I don't want to hear that. But the reason why I don't want to hear that is because he doesn't want to hear things that I have to say. Because I'm noisy in his life, as you are. And it makes it so that we don't want to listen very well to each other. It's easy to know we're not on the same page. So let me tell you about two of my friends in South Texas, also Southern Baptists, Jim and Carol. Jim was my best friend. Carol was my sister's best friend. Later on, those two got married. They didn't always quite understand me, especially like the summer that I went off for a couple weeks to Alvin, Texas, to go serve as an LDS short-term missionary with the guys in the white shirts. Because if you go out to Alvin, Texas, the only people to convert are Baptists. So they didn't quite understand why I was doing that. But guess what they did when I came back home? They loved me. They still invited me over to church. As I invited them to church, so I went there and heard them do all the stuff Baptists do and sing songs like "Just As I Am." I come. And when he graduated, Jim became a civil engineer, worked in the oil industry, and then moved up close to that little town called Alvin, 9 miles away to a small town named Santa Fe. He put his two girls into high school there. Same high school that we're crying about today. Same place where a whole bunch of Southern Baptists, maybe a few Mormons, are struggling to make sense of something, of a horrendous noise that none of us should hear. A noise none of us want to hear. And we haven't been connected to each other for quite a while. The distance from here to there and the differences of our lives have carried us to distinct places. As you can guess, they're from Texas, they're Baptists, you can guess their politics. And yet today, all I feel, is the hurt that they're feeling, the love that they've shared with me, that I have for them. And it's a hurt that's really easy to miss sometimes because of differences of opinion or distance between us. And not just the distance that sometimes we make because of the differences, but also the distance that happens because we just don't notice each other. We go by a lot of people all the time, and sometimes we forget to see the humanity in them. The person that lies there on the other side of that relationship. And to be fair, they sometimes ignore us too, don't they? Or sometimes run from us. And we've created these gaps that make it so that we forget each other. And one of the big reasons we do that is because it's usually easier to look out for me. To do what's easy for me, to do what I like or what makes sense to me. And so we overlook or ignore the difficulties that others face. Harold was a man who had all the money in the world, plenty to be able to take care of everything. So he didn't worry, except for all the health problems he thought he had. things where he wasn't quite well. And so he decided to spend some of that money to go on a trip and live in a new space called Paraiso, an island off the coast of South America. And so in this movie called Why Worry, Harold goes on his vacation. It's amazing how blind we can be, isn't it? How much we can overlook, how much we cannot see. And it's because we usually do a lot of cheering for our side. Go, Troy. That's not quite the way it works in God's world, is it? God continually calls us into relationship, to see the people around us and connect to those people. Call us into those relationships where the hurts of others are meant to dent our hearts and agonize our spirits and move our feet to do something. And if we get caught up too much in the way that I do it or what I think, we oftentimes, like Harold Lloyd, walk through life missing something very important. When you do work with people on the street, you don't always get to choose the politics or the social values of the people you work with. I met Duke about six years ago on the streets in Yuma. And we became friends, not least of which was being Facebook friends, where Duke happens to post quite a bit of his political views. And so he put up a meme that said, had Kanye West there, and said, since Kanye West spoke about President Trump, support in the African American community has doubled. And I put up a thing that said, who's the other one? I thought it was a good joke. Duke didn't like it quite as much. And he responded with an expletive. But it kind of talks about how we deal with Facebook, right? I often have to figure out how to, after I've said something, step back in the relationship and listen to him again, and so does he. But that's what we have to do on a regular basis, isn't it? Is figure out how in the spaces where we don't fit together, not just politically, but economically don't fit together. How many know there's neighborhoods that you ignore in Tucson? I mean, you know, there's people that for whatever reason you don't see. Usually it's because their noise is something you don't want to hear. But what if we began hearing that? I think there's two movements that help us to be able to do that. First of all is an inward movement, where we go into the silence of life and we try to hear something more than what our own life, our own opinions, our own self tells us. Let me see if I can help you with that. How many have sometimes found that Paul is hard for you to listen to? Paul in the Bible. You don't like his epistles quite as much. So over the next 4 commentaries, I'm going to preach on Paul. Just cause. But I'm going to preach from one of the best chapters, Romans 8, where I think you'll find some points of connection. And our first verse is the one that we just heard a little while ago. And it says, all are called to be, by the Spirit of God, as children of God. And that Spirit calls out to us, Abba, Father. Everyone knows what that word Abba literally means? Daddy. It's a very intimate term. The Spirit calls out an intimacy of that divine presence into our life. And how many have felt that? But how many don't quite allow that Abba to be extended to the next person? Especially if it's someone you have a difficulty with, a challenge to your life. But that same Abba Father is speaking to that person as well, and is living in that Baptist heart, or whoever else they are. And if we can, in that quiet space, hear that voice that speaks to us and reminds us of that, then when we go out into that other space where we face those more challenging noises of others, it helps us so that we hear that voice of Spirit speaking to us about them as well. So that when we divide ourselves, or when they speak whatever it is that they speak, we can hear something besides just their voice. That's what Stephen ministers do so well. They go into hard spaces where people are dealing with difficult challenges that they can't fix, but they listen. And they say, I'm here with you. And they learn somehow to speak the language of the person they're with. That's what this day is about. Pentecost says that those disciples all began to speak into the language of each of the people around. They chose to hear and speak what it is that other person needed to hear, not necessarily what was most native to them. Cuero, Texas, where that pastor said that thing I don't want to hear, sits 55 miles from Sutherland Springs. Do you think he's still dealing with some of the aftermath? Still trying to understand that shooting? Can I hear that? Can I listen to that pain in his heart? All the disciples, not just the ones on my side, not just the ones I understand, not just all the disciples were filled with the Spirit. All cried out, Abba. John Wesley, on his deathbed, declared, the best of all, God is with us. And if we listen, not just to God, but to each other, we'll see that God appear in magnificent ways. These are the bad guys. Sometimes it will feel like the obstacle just doesn't go away. The challenges between you continue there, and sometimes miraculously, because you stay there, it does go away. Irregardless of your power or what you've done, it stays somehow. Irregardless of what you've done, it goes somehow. Just as we are, few words to say, for children's blood was shed today, for friends and families in Santa Fe. O grieving God, we come, we come. For those who weep, we hope, believe. For those still wounded, bless.